Welcome to my section of today's webinar. I'm Alex from KAWO. I've been in China for 14 years and I'm the lead designer and developer for our company. I'm a software developer and I first started KAWO with two other guys about 7 years ago, and we built it into one of the leading platforms in China. So today I'm going to share with you some slides from our very recently released Ultimate Introduction to Social Media in China. So we worked really hard on this guide, and I'm not going to share all of it with you today, but I'm going to hopefully give you some of the interesting takeaways from it. So you can see in the introduction here there's lots of different sections, and you're going to get the link to download the full guide after my quick slides here. So we're going to quickly dive into a quick history of the internet in China. You can see obviously that China has a very different internet ecosystem compared to the other top 10 economies in the world, whereas others are very much in the Facebook or Google ecosystem with YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You can see that China has very different ecosystem, and probably many of you are familiar with how that's come about. So internet penetration has risen hugely in China in the last 10 years. It's gone from 34% to 65%, and this presents some really interesting challenges for brands. China also leads the world in its mobile penetration as well, thanks to availability of quite cheap smartphones. So a lot of consumers in China actually are not that as familiar with the internet as we are perhaps in the West or in other countries. And they're also very mobile focused, and so this is really important to consider in our strategies as marketers. One of the myths that we try to dispel with this guide is that China is a copycat country. This may have been the case at one point, but these days China is very much leading the way in innovation. Another part of this guide that we worked really hard on is to explain the diversity of China. On this slide here you can see there's a map of China from The Economist in 2011, comparing all the different Chinese provinces to countries. And I think this is a great example. China might be one country, but actually in some ways it's better to think of it as a continent with very diverse different regions and people from those different regions with different identities. China does have the same, 92% the same ethnicity, 73% speak Mandarin, 74% have no religion, but there's a lot of diversity hidden within the country. One of the other challenges is the breakneck rate of growth. On this slide here we show some of the key events in China over the last 40 years, particularly from sort of a corporate perspective, with the first entry of KFC and Starbucks, the penetration of 4G, and also the failure notably of Best Buy. So a lot of Western brands have struggled in this market because of some of the cultural peculiarities perhaps. On the next slide we look at the city tiers of China, and this is one of the most helpful ways to think about the diversity. Chinese city tiers are defined based on the sophistication of consumers and the penetration of brands into those cities. So maybe in a first, second or third tier city you would find a Starbucks, maybe in a fourth or fifth tier city you'd find KFC. And beyond that, you probably wouldn't find much that you recognize. It would be very much smaller, very low-level stores. And this, when you're talking to consumers, maybe somebody from a first or second tier city has been abroad before, but somebody from a third or fourth tier city or fifth, they may be going abroad for the first time, and so they require very different marketing approaches. You really have to segment your marketing messages and cater to these very different groups within your social channels, and that's something we've helped quite a lot of tourism brands do over the years, to understand those different groups within their audience here in China. On this next slide we just look at the geography of China, and this is a really interesting one for me, like seeing that 50% of the country lives in such a small area of the country, meanwhile only 6% live over in the west of the country. This also in some ways shows the huge potential for growth in China still, as high-speed rail and the Belt and Road project are starting to develop the west of China, and China is expanding its interests in Central Asia. On this next slide we look at the tech rivals in China. So you're probably all familiar with Steve Jobs and Bill Gates' rivalry, and these days we have Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. Well, in China, we also have our own sort of key characters. We've got Jack Ma at Alibaba, Pony Ma at Tencent, Robin Li at Baidu, and the much newer Zhang Yimin at ByteDance. Interestingly, ByteDance is the owner of TikTok and Douyin, which is kind of the Chinese version of TikTok, and one of the first Chinese tech companies to have some major success overseas. So here on this slide, you can see the battlegrounds that they are fighting it out in, and you can see they're in almost every sector, particularly travel and lifestyle. They all have investments in those sectors there, and this really shows that if you're in one ecosystem, it can sometimes be difficult to do business with the other ecosystems. So these top 4 tech companies command 70% of the attention of Chinese citizens. And even though Alibaba dominates in e-commerce, they're actually much lower down in the share of the attention span. And ByteDance, relative newcomer on the scene, has really leapt up there. Douyin has really grown incredibly fast. It's been a very popular platform. Meanwhile, when it comes to advertising revenue, things are kind of flipped to the West. In the West, we're used to Google and Facebook being the dominant digital advertising platforms. And here in China, you can see that it is Alibaba, an e-commerce giant, making more money from advertising. Meanwhile, Tencent, with only 14% of the digital ad revenue, one of the dominant social platforms, doesn't monetize as heavily through ads. Now this creates some very interesting effects in the way that we have to use that platform as brands. We're definitely not as encouraged as you are on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, where you really do have a lot of tools at your disposal. On WeChat, it's very much more focused on its individual users, and we as brands have to play by stricter rules. When we look at the growth of users over time, you can see the phenomenal growth of WeChat that's only really started to level out in the last couple of years. You can see how Weibo, despite a lot of people sort of saying it was had peaked, is actually continuing to grow reasonably steadily. And ByteDance's platform Douyin has roared out of nowhere in just a few short years to almost equal Weibo there. One of the key sections of our report is we go into a lot of detail on the opportunities for brands. I'm not going to cover them here, save show you this slide which shows all of the different ways WeChat can be leveraged by brands. One of the number one questions we hear from teams overseas is they ask us, there are so many things we could be doing on WeChat, we don't really know where to start. And one of our goals with this guide was to really unpick those different options and to help you understand the plethora of them better, including social CRM and how it really connects those aspects together. It's something that really has started to become popular, but I would say a lot of teams are still struggling and not sure where to start with it. So this is one of my favorite slides in our entire guide, and it shows the revenue breakdowns from Facebook, Weibo, and Tencent. And you can clearly see Tencent makes a very small, relatively small percentage of its money from advertising. The majority of it comes from its gaming business, and then actually in second place there is its payments. So I would argue that WeChat is one of the best social networks in the world from a consumer point of view. On Facebook, we are the attention of us as users, and our data is almost the product that is being sold to advertisers. This isn't the case on WeChat. As a brand on WeChat, you really don't have great access to data, and you really do have to play by much stricter rules. You can publish 4 times a month. You don't really know much about your users from demographic terms, but there are a lot of things you can learn, and that's one of the things that we've definitely helped with brands with over the years. We do also in our report cover the travel and tourism industry, although in quite brief detail. We show how the online travel market breaks down with Ctrip, Qunar, and Feiju. We're obviously seeing a huge surge in the growth of FIT as Chinese travelers are becoming more confident traveling abroad and going on less group tourism. We also cover, after looking at the actual platforms, we also cover the travel review sites. And again, in each case, we've tried to list who the owner of that travel review site is, because that'll tell you a lot about how nicely it plays in that ecosystem. For example, Dianping, with their review site, works very well inside WeChat because they have an investment by Tencent, their parent company. Meanwhile, Alibaba with Qiyue more favor that in their ecosystem. We've got this great report written by Faber Novel, which is an agency partner of ours, into the Chinese tourism market. It was written earlier this year and actually covers some of the impact of the coronavirus, written in collaboration with C-Trip, so they got access to a lot of their data there. Then, if you want to read the full report, please download it. It's 158 slides. We cover the whole ecosystem. We really try to give some context and try and make it relatable to a Western audience. You can download it at kawo.com/China-guide. And also, please reach out if you have any questions. So next, I'm just going to share another report we made last year, a little insight which I think is incredibly valuable. So in this report, we analysed over 20 million data points. As a software platform, we have access to a huge amount of data. We looked at over 500,000 Weibo posts and 50,000 WeChat posts in order to do this study. So it was some big data we handled. And this is my favourite takeaway from it. You can see that on a day that a WeChat account stayed silent, they lost 0.016% of their followers and gained 0.43%. On a day they published a weak article, so that's a poor performing article, they actually lost more followers. So it's really easy to lose followers on WeChat. Again, Tencent is very focused on the users of WeChat. They don't want brands polluting your feeds. Inviting an account into your WeChat account is quite a personal thing in some ways. You're taking up space alongside their friends, family. Also, what was more surprising to us is that an average article, so this is the 50% of content that performed the worst, actually was also worse than an account not publishing anything on that day. If you want to get major results in terms of gaining followers, you have to publish a top 5% article or a top 2% article. An amazing article is around top 2% of content. Then we saw an average gain of 9% of followers when you publish this amazing content. So this is another way of looking at it. Your bottom 25% of content is only getting you 6% of your results. Meanwhile, your top 25% of content is delivering more than 50% of your reads and shares. So the conclusion that we came to was that quality really does beat quantity when it comes to WeChat. So moving on to this next case study, one of the DMOs we've worked with for the longest time is NYC and Company. Probably need no introduction. They're responsible for promoting New York City around the world. And we wrote this case study after having worked with them for over 3 years. We looked at how they use our tool for collaboration, so how they use our planning to really set out their message. They estimate that their travelers basically make their decisions essentially about 90 days in advance, and so they use our platform to put in all their events and see what's happening 90 days out, and then schedule content accordingly. This is a great quote from the person we work most closely with at New York City and Company, and she said, you know, there's no other platform she'd recommend for working better with their agency in China. They are able to communicate very easily through our mobile apps, through our desktop platform, and it really makes life a lot easier for both teams, both the agency and NYC and Company. Obviously, very difficult time zone for China, 12 hours difference. Getting on calls is not simple, but Tizer in New York is able to log in anytime she wants and see exactly what's being published. Meanwhile, Daisy, working for the agency here in China, is able to respond to Tizer's feedback, provide suggestions and input herself very smoothly, cutting down on email, etc. So yeah, another great quote from Daisy here about how it makes her life easier. Although we don't always necessarily think about it, we really do want our agencies and partners overseas to have an easier time working with us, even though we're remotely. We built our platform around fusing the best of both worlds, your expertise in your destinations and your properties, and your agency's expertise in the Chinese consumers. So another great thing we helped New York City with was insights. They work with a lot of partners. So in one case, they were trying to promote their hotel partners. And they actually learned through our data analysis and insights that it was better to promote a group of hotels, and it delivered much more value for their partners than it was to promote an individual hotel. And it's this kind of data analysis that I think they really came to trust us for, the ability to segment your content into different types. Because Chinese consumers might not be as into the things that you're used to promoting in other countries. If a Chinese person was traveling to Australia, they'd probably be less likely to want to go surfing or to maybe hike in the mountains or visit the rock in the centre of the country than they would be to want to sit by Sydney Opera House and take a selfie or something like that. And so we really have to adapt that message, and KAWO really helps you find out what parts resonate. In the case of New York City, they found people enjoyed content more about ice cream and donuts than they did about pizza and burgers, which New York City is rather known for. So in terms of what we do at KAWO, we have built this platform. We work with many brands around the world in many different sectors, right from cosmetics, fashion, luxury, education, tourism, regulated industries. We work heavily with sport, which can often be good partners for destinations. I know the NFL and some of the European football teams have done some good partnerships with destination marketing in China. And we also work with individuals as well. So Bill Gates, Will Smith, Taylor Swift are all customers of our platform. Essentially what we try to do is we try to build the best software for you and your teams to work well around the world. We're essentially trying to get rid of your Excel spreadsheets, your PPTs, and give you a platform where you can log in. You're not waiting for your agency to give you a report. You can get the data when you want, as easily as you can. And this is what it looks like. It's very simple and clean. You get these great dashboards where you can see all the stats really easily. You have a planning calendar where you can all work together to schedule the content, collaborate, approve, comment on it. You have this great interface for publishing content that makes it really easy. Our entire app is available in English and Chinese, making it easy for cross-cultural teams. And it works for WeChat, Weibo, and Douyin as well. And so here you can see a WeChat post we published, and the stats are available quickly online there. We have great reporting, and you can export everything as well. The data is not held within our platform. You can do whatever you want with it. And also this final piece, the content analysis, really helping you to break down that content and understand what's working and what's not. So that's it from me. I realise that's been my time today, and please, if you want to connect with me, you can reach out on LinkedIn or email me directly, alex@kawo.com. Thanks to Anita and the team for inviting me to participate in today's webinar, and I'll happily take any questions.